Young people are stepping up for climate ambition.
Climate ambition is very simple. It is recognizing that there's more hard work that needs to be put into this space.
We are the generation that is driving ambition.
We are the change makers.
And we are unstoppable.
Climate ambition means to me higher NDC of different countries.
Securing a future that is livable for my generation and the generations to follow.
Climate ambition to me means the collective will.
Speaking my truth to power.
Being active in my country's NDCs.
And achieving biodiversity conservation.
Climate ambition to me is seeing developed countries step up.
Not leaving anyone behind.
Including more youth, helping them drive the climate change agenda.
Climate ambition is integrating climate change in every different sectors of life.
We're the generation that drives ambition.
We're youth for climate.
We are driving climate ambition.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the 6th episode of the Youth for Climate live series. We are so glad you could all be here with us today. And the voices that you just heard from were captured nearly 1 year ago at COP25. So it only makes sense that we drive the conversation forward today toward COP26. And if we can't see you, we would love if you could turn on your video and join our lovely video wall. Hi, everyone. So good to see you. We want all of you to be a part of today's episode. And please let us know where you're tuning in from today. And be sure to share your thoughts, your questions, your encouragements as we go along. I see that, we've had the poll asking the question, what does climate ambition mean or look like to you? And we're going to try to incorporate as much of your views into today's conversation as we can. If you're joining for the first time, welcome. I'm your co-host, Salina.
And I'm your other co-host, Ahmed. If you'd like to listen to the live Italian translation of this episode, you can change the language below. And we want today's conversation to go beyond this virtual room. So we really encourage you to also share your perspective on social media with the hashtag #YouthForClimateLive.
So if you weren't able to join us last month, make sure you catch up on episode 5. It's on our website, youthforclimate.live, or you can get a quick recap by reading the Lowdown blog. We'll send you the link in the chat now. So episode 5's blog was written by Sade Dean. She's the founder of Step Up Sustainability Solutions. If you're interested in being a guest writer for the Lowdown, just send us a message in the chat.
So we're gathered here today on what would have been one of the final days of COP26 to talk about climate ambition. With the COP postponed until next year, it couldn't be more important to continue stepping up our collective ambition to close the gap between where we are and where we need to go. As of today, we're not on track to keep global warming in check. Sea level rise is accelerating. Human livelihoods are threatened by increasingly frequent and severe natural disasters. And 2016 to 2020 is set to be the warmest 5-year period on record.
So the Paris Agreement states that we should aim to keep temperatures well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. However, if we rely only on current country commitment, temperatures are expected to rise to 3.2 degrees in this century. To close the gap between current efforts and the level of action that we need, decision makers from the public and the private sectors must ratchet up their ambition.
And you may have heard the term NDC, which stands for Nationally Determined Contribution, and is what we call each country's individual commitment towards achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. And these NDCs are intended to be strengthened every 5 years, and indeed a few countries have already submitted their enhanced NDCs this year, although the COVID-19 crisis has delayed some of this process.
Yeah, so it's kind of crazy. With the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement coming in just a few weeks, all countries need to enhance the commitments they made 5 years ago. And all actors in society should focus on how they can support meeting these Paris targets. Today's conversation is part of the Race to Zero dialogues convened by the high-level champions for global climate action, which will set the stage for the Paris Agreement anniversary on December 12th, as we move and build momentum for a shift to a decarbonized economy at COP26.
And to help set the stage for today's discussion, we have a special message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency António Guterres.
I thank the government of Italy for convening this important conversation. And I thank the youth of our world here and marching in the streets, for your inspiring engagement on the climate crisis. This is the most pressing issue of our time, especially for your generation. You are having a major impact, and we are starting to see signs that the tide is turning. Our goal is zero net emissions by 2050. We rely on young activists like yourselves to help us get there. Recent announcements from several major emitting countries and global businesses are encouraging. By early 2021, countries representing more than 65% of emissions and more than 70% of the world economy will have made ambitious commitments to carbon neutrality. This sends a signal to the markets, institutional investors, and decision makers. Coal is on the way out. Renewable energy is in. Carbon should be given a price, and subsidies for fossil fuels should end. And we must shift the tax burden from income to carbon and from taxpayers to polluters. These are big but necessary changes, and we need your passion, ideas, and determination to ensure the job gets done. This is why this year I established my Youth Advisory Group on climate change. I've asked this group to consult with other young climate leaders as widely as possible, including at the virtual Youth Conference on Climate Change starting tomorrow. We also face an unprecedented pandemic, but the response to COVID-19 has shown us that when people see it is necessary, we can quickly change how we live, work, consume, and cooperate. Major and rapid change is exactly what we need in the fight against climate disruption. Change that will make our planet more livable, sustainable, and inclusive, and no group is more effective in pushing leaders to change but you. I urge you all to put this power to work in your schools, your workplaces, and your online communities. I urge you to keep raising your voices, bringing your ideas, and driving forward the ambition we need. When you march, the world follows. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for that inspiring message. And today we have a fantastic lineup of speakers, and we're very excited to hear the different perspectives that they'll bring. We'd like to start out naturally with a youth perspective, hearing from a climate leader who is standing for action in her home country of Sudan, as well as on the international stage.
That's right. Please join me in welcoming Nisreen Elsaim, the current chair of the Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. Hi, Nisreen.
Hi. We'd also like to welcome two of our distinguished guests to the virtual stage, the Italian Minister for Environment, Land and Sea, Minister Sergio Costa, and CEO of the B Team, Halla Tómasdóttir. Thank you so much for being here as keynote listeners. We look forward to hearing your remarks later in the session.
And we're going to jump right in. Nisreen, you've been a strong advocate for climate action over the last few years, and with the record floods in Sudan this fall, you've seen firsthand the drastic consequences of the climate crisis. What does climate ambition look like to you, and what role do you think the Youth Advisory Group can play in motivating the public and private sectors to achieve that level of ambition?
We witnessed a very massive, destructive floods a few weeks ago here in Sudan. And I can say right now that I'm an eyewitness on what climate change can actually do and climate crisis could look like. For me, climate ambition is not only thinking on the quantity of the lower emissions, but also the quality of the actions we are doing. So it's not only thinking outside the box, but forgetting that we have a box in the first place. So this is the raising ambition for me, is to forget that there is a box in the first place.
Thank you so much, Nisreen. It's so important to think about the structures before we even talk about how we talk about those structures. So thank you so much for that thoughtful insight.
Exactly, and that's why we have so many different perspectives here today. Now for insight from the national level, we'd like to turn to Minister Costa. Welcome, Minister Costa. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are so excited that Italy will be hosting the pre-COP meetings next year.
And we'd like to talk first about climate ambition in Europe. the EU will have to submit its enhanced NDC by the end of 2020. Can you tell us about the status of the preparations and your expectations for its level of ambition?
Well, first of all, hello to everybody. So wonderful to meet with you, although we're going through a very tough moment. I'd like to tell you something. We are within the framework of the Paris Agreement, and I'm speaking on behalf of Italy and the European Union, and we believe in it. Our goal is carbon neutrality in 2050. Of course, we have to get there according to the Paris Agreement with a number of steps. The first one is 2030. So the NDC is the one which is being defined with the so-called law which is being passed by the European Union with at least 55%. At least should mean more than 55%. There's a push for all member countries, Italy, of course, as well, to make a further effort. This is a big commitment because this should push us to change our integrated national plan for energy and climate that each European country has to file with a 5-year report in line with the Paris Agreement to show what each country does, how it is traceable. So our deadline is not only 2030, but also 2050. So it's an extremely important commitment. But what's important to report about right now is that not only Italy, but the European Union believes in the Paris Agreement and complies with it. And it is also a symbolic venue for future building.
Thank you, Minister Costa. It's so great to hear about plans. And that is something that young people are really interested in, is talking about what are the firm commitments on the table, how is it traceable, and how is this contributing to a future we can all believe in and be proud of. So we will be having a Q&A session. Sorry, actually, I have an additional question because this is something that a lot of us...
I thank you for this question, because it allows me to say that as co-organizers and co-chair of COP26, and on behalf of Italy, we had an insight and an intuition, and I'm saying it with pride, to involve young people from scratch. For me, there is a great difference between asking young people to do something and have them become part of a structural pathway that is negotiating together with young people. That's why we organized pre-COP, which is to be held here in Milan. But since September 28 to September 30th, 2021, we have organized the Youth for Climate Conference. That is, we shall call upon all young people from all over the world and coming from the countries that have signed the Paris Agreement to come to Milano and talk about a number of issues, like ambition, which is really in the heart of all countries, education. Education is really a pivotal point on how to fight against climate change, how food plays a role in this particular sector, how science can be indeed very useful for young people to fight against all these problems. And then another point is fashion, for instance, which is a staple industry in Italy, how to contribute to, for instance, get rid of plastic materials and etc. But within the framework of the Organization of Youth for Climate is based upon 3 pillars: participation, dialogue, and comparison among the various countries. So participation by young people, dialogue with all the parties and stakeholders, and indeed comparison with the ministers of the environment of the countries, called upon to decide what's going to be happening during COP26 in Glasgow. So Milan is a pivotal point, and that's what's new. And we're asking young people at the end of this pathway to file a statement and a declaration, not only what you're asking for, but what you proposed, which is a new element.
Wow, that's amazing to hear. I know we all know the Driving Ambition event is next year in Milan. We're very excited about it. We're thankful that you're creating this space. So thank you so much for telling us a bit more about the event and the ways that it's going to also be innovative and unique, and that everyone will have to put commitments and a declaration on the table in terms of what we're going to contribute.
Absolutely. And we'll be having a Q&A session later on. So if you think of any questions as the conversation continues, please submit them in the chat and let us know which speaker they're for. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a young climate leader joining us from Argentina. Hi, Máximo. So Máximo Mazzocco is the founder of Eco House Argentina and the co-founder of Climate Alliance Argentina and the UNDP Generation 17 youth leader.
Yeah, so we want to dive right in. Máximo, young people are playing a huge role in pushing their countries to be more ambitious in their climate plans. And from what we've heard, this is especially true in Argentina. Can you tell us how young people are actively engaging in the design and in the implementation of your country's climate policies? And we'd also love to hear any lessons learned that could inform other countries' efforts to engage youth.
Okay, hi, how are you? Thank you very much for having us. Today is an historic day in our country, in Argentina, because after a hard and great work between civil society and politicians of every party, we finally approved a national law that requires state employees to educate themselves in environmental studies, especially in climate crisis. This is a huge step for us, and it's a huge achievement. So we are really happy today, especially because education is one of the pillars of change, and we managed to take it to the next level. Despite the fact that there's still a lot of work to do, here in our region, especially in Argentina, we are growing in numbers, and the environmental crisis, the climate crisis, the ecological crisis is starting to take a seat on the big table. This is what's going on right now. We work very, very, very hard since many years ago with a simple philosophy. Let's find a way to work in the similarities we have as human beings and not concentrating ourselves in the differences. Because I'm going to give an example from our part of the world. In Argentina, for example, we have a lot of populist parties, and usually they concentrate all the efforts to attack other parties and always work in the differences. But when we are going to start thinking, okay, you need water, you need the air to breathe, you need this, and this. And that was like our first philosophy to work with. And doing that, because we don't have a political party, we are citizens that we want a better world, and not like a nice phrase to say, we really want a better world. We start working with all the political parties. And that was the keystone for the, I don't know if they are great, but many great achievements that we already have, like the national law of climate change, the one that I just talked about, and many others at all levels, small cities and towns, big cities, provinces and states, and national level. We work with every political party without thinking of the revenue of this, and also thinking how if you want something little to get from this, okay, we are going to help you. We don't care. We only need a national law of climate change, for example. And with this philosophy, I'm working very hard to make a great team between all the environmental organizations, because we know that sometimes the teamwork is hard. but we made a big effort to, for example, formulate the Climate Alliance, and that was so important because we are all thinking to achieve the same thing, and that was another keystone. And also here we work very hard with the concept of think globally and act locally. Again, I will say that this should not be a nice phrase for the social network or to say every day. We had to think how to take this to reality, how to materialize this concept. And we are in a very big country, and it's very important to understand that in every part of the world we have different ways to do stuff and do it correctly. Pluralism. There are many ways of doing something right, not only one way. In Argentina, 50% of the country is poor. Maybe more now with the coronavirus. When I go out in the street in our biggest city, Buenos Aires, I walk one block, 100 meters, and I have a 7-year-old that is asking me for food. She's 7 years old and she didn't have a breakfast or not even one meal. So how I am lucky and I had an education and I can buy food. Okay, how can I do something to tell that little person that she has to do something about climate change? Okay, and it's like, it's so unjust, that conversation. So in every part of the country, we have different strategies. It's not one strategy for all the country. Because you have, in a big city, you have to do a different strategy than in the middle of the countryside. I don't know if I'm speaking a lot. I had like 5 minutes, so please cut me when I have to finish. But the strategy that we are doing here is to think very carefully to whom we are speaking and what that person, a collective, needs. It's different to speak to the farm people that works a lot with cows and pigs. Here we have a big problem with that because it's a center thing for climate change, we know. And it's different to speak to the vegan society and community. And how we do to get them to work together towards achieve the NDCs and everything we are talking about.
Yeah.
So the lesson here, the only thing that I will say, because you asked me, the lesson is to work in the similarities and to do it with love, but not, again, with love for social network, really with love, thinking in the other person, in the families. We are all human beings. We are all human beings that we have a lot of problems, and there's no one that is perfect. So let's concentrate our energies to do stuff.
I love the message that you are sending out to us, because it is about building coalitions and building strategies that ultimately get us to where we want to go, and we have the same goal. And I think it's so powerful to bring this up also in this context when we have such different speakers here with us today. And I think one actor and sector that we sometimes look at and don't engage with is the private sector. And I think we're really excited and happy to have that perspective here with us today in the conversation.
Absolutely, Maximo. And I think you hit on so many important themes, and especially one of responsibility. When we think of climate action, we have to think about this shared responsibility. It's not just going to be on one group to solve it all. We all have to do our part, but we also have to be sensitive to marginalized groups that maybe it's not their priority because they have other things that they need to fix first before they can tackle that issue. So thank you so much for providing that perspective. And now we'd like to hear from Ms. Halla Tómasdóttir, CEO of the B Team. Halla, we're so glad to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us. You've been such a strong advocate in the private sector for leadership that centers on sustainability, equality, and accountability. And the B Team is an official partner of the Race to Zero campaign. In your view, what do we need to see from the private sector in the near term in order to achieve net zero emissions by 2050? How do we bring along companies that might be more reluctant to make meaningful changes to business as usual?
Yeah, the B team was founded actually to confront business as usual, and we were probably the first group of leaders to put out that net zero by 2050 or before vision. But and I'm so grateful to be here with you today, because I think this is an intergenerational challenge, and so this is the conversation that needs to be happening right here and right now. First of all, we need to move the timeline up. We need to hear from business now that they are going to at least halve the emissions by 2030. So while we need to keep that long-term ambition to get to 1.5 degrees by 2050, we need to know what business is doing by 2030. And I'm glad to say we have companies on the B team that are starting to move up that timeline into the 2030s. So they are leading the way. But we cannot just talk about climate. We need to have a people and human focus. Máximo, I can't thank you enough for bringing that up, because we've lost people from this journey by not connecting with them on that human level. And I think incorporating nature-based solutions and language that's more humane and closer to people is going to be critical for those leading the way, whether it's private sector, public sector, or civil society. And everybody can hug a tree and connect with tree. And I'm not saying that should come in place of the emission reductions. That has to happen. But in addition, we could excite people more around nature-based solution, and that will support our health and positive momentum. And I also think we should really call on our investors. The couple of B team leaders were part of creating the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance last year. And now there are large asset owners, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds coming together to align their portfolios. And this is powerful. And you should all know, because you're such strong and powerful leaders, this next generation, and you get it, you should know that you can call on your pension funds and you can call on your sovereign wealth funds, because they need to be aligning their assets, not just to manage risk, but to manage that there will be wealth for you. So long term, they need to align with this. And last but not least, we are really calling on business and saying it's no longer enough to change your own company. That's table stakes. What you need to be doing, you need to be holding your supply chain accountable, or holding yourself accountable for transforming the supply chain, bringing your peers along. You need to be advocating for policy. We need to make sure we don't have companies that say, we're going to get to net zero by 2050, but we're still putting money into politicians or lobbying efforts that work against it, or even part of trade associations that lobby against necessary policies that need to be set. So there's a lot that business needs to do to show up, but I'm very encouraged by the fact that we have over 1,000 companies now with science-based targets, and the momentum and race to zero really does feel full on. I think my concern is that, are we getting there in humane ways? Are we bringing people along, or are we leaving them feeling left behind and like this is some kind of an elitist journey? This is a journey that is of the benefit of all of humanity. It's about shared prosperity on a healthy planet. We need to start thinking and talking a little bit more around those kind of issues. And but I'm encouraged about what's going on.
Thank you. I think it's great to hear us really converging to the same language and the same vision and mission, because I think this is the first step, is really aligning us across our differences and understanding that we have work to do together. A lot of us here, a lot of the people watching, we're just starting our careers, and we'd love to know what can companies and young people do to close the generational gap and bring younger voices and perspectives into private sector decision making.
That's such a great question. And first of all, I just want to say that every courageous CEO or board member I have met usually has a story about their own children or the next generation of their employees who have actually moved them. So never underestimate your efforts as children of existing leaders or as younger employees of moving those who sit in existing power and may be a little bit stuck in the crisis of conformity, as I like to call it. So you can move the dial, and most CEOs I know, they've been moved by people like you. So keep going, raise your voice, bring your values to the table like never before. And of course, vote. not just in the recent US elections, but in every election everywhere. Vote and make sure that you actually align your democratic right and responsibility in line with this vision. And use your wallet, the power of your wallet. Think about who you do business with. Consumers are really meaningfully moving business. We see this in fashion, we see this in lots of sectors, in transport, and so use your wallet. And last but not least, use your savings. And even if you have a small amount of saving, most of us have a small piece in a pension fund. They are the big asset owners who can move and change norms from businesses. So make sure you put as much pressure as you can on them and work only for companies that are either on the journey to the right direction or get them on the journey to this direction. We've seen some of the greatest leaps by companies. Amazon is one example, when employees collectively raised their voices and demanded from their companies to do more.
Thank you so much. I think these are great examples. We are seeing a lot of change in terms of either money being put on the table, ways being changed. And I think that you've given us a lot of actionable steps that we all need to reflect on and see what works for us, what can we do that we are not already doing, how in some ways are we also stuck in the crisis of conformity. But I know that
Can I give you two concrete examples of really innovative stuff that I've seen recently, just so you can take them somewhere else? One of our B Team leader companies has a separate ESG board, because let's not forget that climate and sustainability and social issues are linked and deeply interconnected. And we need to change our governance and make sure we are transparently measuring both. This company now invites the next generation into its board meetings when they talk about ESG and invite the next generation to ask tough questions. Easy to implement, very powerful and transformative. Another example is that last year, IKEA, the international retail company from the Nordic region, where I'm also from, they hosted an intergenerational and international dialogue about climate change between climate youth leaders and big CEOs. One of the outcomes was a sustainability council of next generation leaders, and it is transforming the company, its products, its services, etc. So a couple of easy examples that any company, any leader, and any of you can advocate for. So we start having these intergenerational conversations about this challenge in more impactful way, or in the most impactful way possible.
Thank you. I know we're going to all appreciate these examples. And as we go forward to also hear the experiences from the youth activists that we're seeing and what their reflections are on your comments. Thank you so much for that.
And speaking of the youth activists, we have a comment in the chat from Daniela, who says that we have to raise our voice and educate people around us to drive change into a sustainable economy. We couldn't agree more, Daniela. Thank you. And again, please, if you're keeping up with us on the chat, please do send in your questions. We're coming up on the Q&A here soon. Just send over the question and which speaker it's for, and we'll ask it. And now we'd like to welcome our final speaker, Luisa Neubauer, who is a climate activist and co-organizer of Fridays for Future Germany. Over the last few years, you've been at the forefront of climate strikes, and you've brought a lot of young people along with you. Your research and activism has focused on holding decision makers accountable, including those in the private sector. Can you tell us about this work and your priorities heading into Glasgow? And in your view, what can young people do to urge the private sector to take ambitious action?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for inviting to this round that is so much needed. I think, first of all, it's really important to, agree or get to a common ground and an understanding that we are in the midst of an accelerating climate crisis that is nowhere near stopped or under control. And we are rushing on a pathway towards a 3 to 5 degree warmer world. And there's no plan, there's no government, there is no real concept really to stop this. And no country in the world, and no region, and in particularly not in those who are the most responsible, which are the wealthy nations in the Northern Hemisphere mostly. This is a status quo. And since the Paris Agreement was signed, an unbelievable amount of additional fossil fuels have been installed, have been financed, have been secured. Lobbyists have been invited to governmental rounds, and despite all promises, despite all big speeches, despite all scientific reports, governments around the world have somehow agreed to ignore most of that and to keep on going as before. That is where we are today. Emissions should have been dropping this year drastically. They spiked a little given the corona crisis, yet that was unintentional. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there is no governmental effort right now that guarantees us that we are on a safe pathway and that we can live now and in the future on a safe planet. So obviously, the question here is really how do we change that? And given that just nice words and promises haven't changed much in the past, we've been mobilizing for 2 years now across the globe, urging leaders to stick to what they signed up for. And I think here again, it's really important to notice that it's not young people just wanting randomly something from governments, but reminding them what they guaranteed, what they promised to do when they signed the Paris Agreement, which is keeping global emissions to well below 2 degrees. And so that is it's 2 years later, and we're seeing that there has not been that kind of change that we would need. There have been an incredible amount of nice words and speeches again, yet no action has taken place in most places in the world, really, that would bring us to where we should be. And of course, we understand it's a really complex issue, and it's a transformational issue too. So we won't be able to change things from one day to another. But what we need are significant steps towards the right direction that actually make a difference in a emission in the world of emissions. And it here isn't a question of who has the nicest diplomatic speech to give, but who can make the difference in the molecules, in the atmosphere, in the places where we need those changes to take place. So we are keeping organizing despite all difficulties, and we keep urging leaders to act. And what we also do, and I think this is why it's so nice, especially here, to have such a group of such diverse actors, we are building coalitions and alliances. And I think this is also one very important aspect here. It's intergenerational what we do, it's intersectional what we do, it's global what we do. And I think that is one fundamental aspect to our work.
Thank you so much, Luisa. As you mentioned, progress is happening, but we still have a long way to go. And I really appreciate what you said about accountability and kind of the nuance within accountability, that we're not, as young people, we're not always asking for, completely new things, that these are things that, have already been agreed upon, but that we need to kind of see through and continue advocating for. So thank you so much for that thoughtful insight. And in just a moment, we'll have the opportunity to ask our speakers some of your questions. So please remember the Q&A is coming up, and just send it over in the chat, and we'll ask our speakers here in a moment. Thank you so much, Luisa.
Yeah, so our audience has really reflected on climate ambition early on, and we want to give them a chance to contribute more to today's conversation. We have a few questions in a poll. So to the audience, please scan the QR code or click on the link in the chat to take part. An early reflection I loved from the first question. Someone said, climate ambition is the ambition to live worldwide, to have a better life in all aspects. And I just love this aspirational vision that people have been talking about. And the question we all want you to answer now is really simple. It's more practical. It's, do you know about your country's climate commitment or action plan? A is no, but I'd like to. B, a little bit. C, yes, I'm familiar with what my country's pledged. And D is next level. Yes, and my country has submitted an enhanced NDC. Ooh. I don't want to put you on the spot, Ahmed, but where do you lie on this question?
I think I was aware before, but I didn't have an idea of how to keep up with the plan and the progress. So I think that's one thing that I learned, probably a year or so ago is not just knowing what the NDCs are, but how to track the NDCs year by year, because I think progress is so important. And so that's one thing that I recently learned about that's very important. What about you? How did you first learn about NDCs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the time in the Paris Agreement when there were INDCs, intended national determined contributions, that's when I checked in. So I would fall, with the majority of people so far have said, yes, I'm familiar with what my country has pledged. So actually, I have to admit, I haven't really checked in to see if they've submitted their enhanced NDC. And even more so, you've touched on this piece of progress. Do we know how they've progressed? So thanks everyone for contributing to this. We've got a second question for you, which may be really more easy for you to answer because it's about your views. So we want to know, what do you think is the most important step the private sector can take to drive climate ambition? Option A is setting net zero by 2050 goals. B, publishing short, medium, and long-term sustainability plans. C, reporting progress towards science-based emissions targets. D, is innovating new climate solutions. E, creating sustainable products for consumers. And F, supporting ambitious national and international policies. So we're seeing a lot of answers come in. I am surprised at how quickly everyone is picking, because this is a tough question. There's so many options.
And we also want to stress that these are also so intersectional. It's not just one or the other. But would love to hear what's a priority for all of you.
Yeah, this one is tough. I wasn't sure how everyone would respond, but it does look like there is one piece of the pie that is growing, or at least bigger than the rest. And it looks like it's setting net zero by 2050 as a really kind of solid target that we want to see companies engage in. And if you can see the other one, I think it would be in pink, right, Ahmed?
Yes.
Yeah. That's supporting ambitious national and international policies. So it's a clear, resounding, the private sector needs to take action, and just kind of feeling like a lot of people want the private sector to take many different types of actions related to science-based target, innovating, looking at how consumers have new products. So I'd love to just dive into this a little bit deeper. Thank you so much, everyone, for contributing and sharing your priorities.
And now that we've heard from all of you, we'd like to continue the conversation with all of our speakers on stage. Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah, welcome. So Nisreen, Máximo, and Luisa, we'd love to give you the opportunity to share any reflections you have about these poll results, or the remarks that you've heard earlier from Minister Costa and Ms. Tómasdóttir.
Luisa, let's start with you. Anything that you would like to reflect on the conversation so far?
Well, we talk a lot about ambition here, and I think it will be something that's really up on my head right now is the fact that ambition is important, yet ambition needs to be, based on scientific evidence and on what Paris and other agreements on biodiversity and ecological crises, on the climate, etc., are suggesting. And right now, what we see in many places, and in particular, for instance, in Europe, where I come from, we see that there's no ambition that actually lines up with what has been signed up to. So even if you're staying on track on what your climate target may be, we're not getting anywhere near where we should be. And we talked about accountability and how people, can be up to date with the climate plans of the government and with the NDCs, yet that is hugely misleading when ambitions and targets don't add up. And that is something that's actually making it much harder for anyone who's fighting for the climate, who's, wanting to protect lives also in the future, is, the additional effort that it needs to educate the public that talking of ambition is just really some flowery way of saying, actually, we're not intending to get where we should be, and we're just setting random other targets that we might think are, easier to reach for us. And I think there what we need is much more of a transparency mechanism, and we need more accountability, and obviously we need, mechanisms that hold governments accountable on this.
Thank you, Luisa. Máximo, what do you think?
Thank you all for everything and the space. I love to be here and listen all the reflections. Climate ambition for us is a just world ambition. It's not climate only. The question is, what are we doing daily to achieve that justice? It is only a speech. It is only something governments and companies have to work on, or the individuals and citizens too. We believe that we are all part of the chain of society. Everyone that can should do their part. And that can thing is very important from what I said before. When we started 12 years ago as youth movement, we were 8 in front of the National Congress, trying to take the agrotoxics down from our country. That is the #1 country for an acre of land applying agrotoxics. So we were 8, 10. Now, last year, we were 6,000, 7,000, and we are just right now starting to develop an awareness of what is going on in this part of the world. It's not something that we work a lot of years. A small group of people work a lot of years. As I said, 50% of our country is trying to survive. It's trying to survive. That's it. They are not thinking about all this stuff we are talking about. The other part is trying to pay the bills. They are not thinking about what we are talking about. They're 90%, 95% is trying to survive. And a very, very small group of people is working on the National Climate Change Plan, for example. So we have to realize the situation, and we have to work very hard, again, realizing that we're in a transition. We have an urgency. We would like to change everything for tomorrow. 100 species, 150 species, 50 species are disappearing every day. It depends the report you read, because all the reports say something different sometimes. But we are in an urgent matter. How we do to take to the point A to the B to the C, and etc. For us, is working really, really, really hard and gaining more people every day. More people. And if the consequences then hit us hard, that maybe they are already hitting us, it's what we deserve. We got to accept that. Okay, we did this thing in the past, very bad. Now we have these consequences. So let's work very hard to fix what we can. What we can fix. But don't stay sitting down in your chair if you can do something. And a lot of people can do something, and they are sitting down and they know what's going on. That's why we are always going to say that environmental education, sustainable development education is the first step for everything. Everyone should know what's going on, and then, okay, if you are not doing something, it's more responsibility for you. You know, and you're not doing something, okay. But for us, people is good in the inside. So when we speak to people, they get together and they say, okay, we want to join you. That's our experience. That's why now we are thousands and thousands in Argentina. Sorry, I will shut up.
No, thank you so much, Máximo. Nisreen, what would you like to add?
Well, I would like to say that young people are already trying to build the momentum needed for us to raise the ambition. For example, yesterday we had our first youth consultation as a UN Youth Advisory Group on climate change. And one of the sessions or breakout rooms were actually about raising ambition and race to zero, and we got a lot of comments about the rules of government, the rules of civil society and youth movements, and the rule of private sector when it comes to raise zero net emission and the right to raise the ambition. And many of the comments we got was actually about not having enough finance, not having enough political will and even if it was there on the speeches, when it comes to actions, political will was actually missing sometimes. And also all of them agreed that without a push from public sector, like the government, the private sector will not be much willing to reduce. And some people actually ask many questions. Some people ask why we should actually stop using fossil fuel when technology and knowledge and science can actually invent something that can absorb the CO2 instead of just letting the CO2 go to the air. And they actually asked many questions that showed me and my colleagues at the UN Secretary General Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change that we still have a long way to cross. Tomorrow, 19th of November, will be the closing for the Race to Zero mission session, and I will be receiving, along with Mr. Nigel Topping, the special high-level champion for COP26, the recommendations from young people regarding this matter, and I am sure it will be very much diverse when it comes to what needed to be done. And a lot of people are talking actually right now about countries committing to reach net zero by 2050. Well, I don't really think we have time until 2050 to reach net zero, but I think we haven't actually explored enough solutions or enough changes to our routine. We only think one way, like with reducing using fossil fuel, but not reducing the emissions itself. I would like to say that the UN Youth Advisory Group to Climate Change is not only trying to advise the Secretary General on what we think as young people, but also to form somehow of a bridge between young people and the Secretary General, and also young people and different climate action leaders from civil society, from government, and also from different institutes. What will actually be needed very much is to stop taking young people and creating young people as a trend or a checkbox, like having young person in every panel, talking to young people in every meeting, having a parallel sessions for young people every time or every conferences. And then we had many outcomes. We have a yearly COI, Conference of Youth for the COP. We have LCOIs, local conference of youth everywhere, every year. We have different initiatives for different people, young people around the world, and all of these initiatives actually come out with a document or a paper or a statement, and then it goes to the shelf of any cabinet or any office or any desk. And I think the real meaningful inclusion of young people is actually stop doing what we are doing right now and do it in the young way or in the youth way. And yeah, as I said earlier, innovation, technology, and new investment, not in only securing jobs, not only stopping the fossil fuel, but actually finding a way to use different energy sources we have right now with less or zero emissions, and also because there is no jobs in a dead planet. Humanity was there before economy, and I think the COVID-19 is just a small trailer or small experiment of what we can do or what we will have if we continue business as usual. At least with the COVID-19, you can be safe inside of your house, and if you wear your mask. But with climate crisis, no one will be safe, and nowhere will be safe. And I guess to add my conclusion or my remarks, we really don't have time to continue listening to empty words. We don't have time to continue having political statements without having actions. We don't have time to gather money, because we will reach a point where all of the money we have will not fix the situations we will be falling in. And also, we don't have time to think on the traditional way. As I said earlier in my first intervention, we should actually think outside the box. And the Youth Advisory Group is actually going to be the frank eye of the Secretary General in every event and every conference and every movement around the world, and we will be giving our frank, honest reflections on that, because as young persons, our first and only priority is the planet and the next generation.
Thank you so much, Nisreen, Máximo, and Luisa. I think it's been incredible to hear your remarks because they speak to different topics that I think we have been coming through today. So there's the urgency of, even 2050 commitments are not enough. And then there's the role that people have to play and that we all have, and it's uniquely different, right? So there's, Máximo, you really touched on what can everyone do, all of society, the public. And then there's also these power holders, the people who can influence more than any of us sometimes can by putting the money, the commitments, the scale at which they can operate at. And so I want us to dive deeper into this while encouraging new thinking, out-of-the-box solutions through our Q&A segment. So everyone, I know you've already started submitting, but if you have any questions for our speakers, this is your chance. Please ask them now. And don't forget to let us know who they're for. And to get us started, I want to continue on the power holders. And I have a question for Minister Costa. Minister, Italy will host the G20 next year. And as part of your country's presidency, how will you ensure that the G20 contributes to rising climate ambition and achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement?
Well, listen, taking into consideration that 2021 is going to be a year that for a number of situations will see us have the presidency of the G20 here in Italy, but at the same time we are the co-chair of COP26 pre and COP26. So this is a fundamental year to design, together with the big countries, the future and also play a role in terms of climate change, because there are big producers involved as well. We have organized a couple of ministerial conferences in July in Italy, one on climate and energy and the other one on environment. We shall connect both, and climate and energy in the same conference, because one thing cannot be disconnected by the other, but has to be connected with the larger idea of environment. So we'll have, sitting around the same table, those who speak about energy, environment, and all the other issues. And this is for 2021. Then COP26, people, planet, and prosperity. Now, by people, we mean that we have to have women and kids at the heart of the discussion. Máximo said it before. Women and kids today within climate change are the most fragile people, and therefore let's put them at the center of G20. And then climate, energy, and environment, which are the pivotal points of the ministerial conferences. And then let's involve all the young people, and when it comes to our planet, we thought to build up the so-called great boundaries of ecological transition. Ecological transition has inside itself a number of other transitions and changes, such as changes having to do with energy, sustainable development, green requirements that we are asking companies to comply with. But also, this is conceived as the strategic guidelines of Rio de Janeiro in 1992, biodiversity certification, for instance. And these are all the issues that have to be at the heart of our discussions. And eventually prosperity. Prosperity means being sustainable. We're talking about sustainable organizations, but within the framework of this ecological change. If we connect people, planet, and prosperity, our goal is not to leave behind anybody. No one's in the population, in other words. Therefore, fair and equal, which is one of the principles of the Paris Agreement. G20 is connected with COPE, and that's why we define our 2021.
I love that. Thank you so much for giving us insight into how your country and the presidency is looking at shaping G20 next year in such a crucial time frame as we look to climate commitments and as we look into really thinking of new ways that we can reshape how we view development, prosperity, and growth as a kind of a planet. So yeah, I want to kick off officially the Q&A segment and hand off to Ahmed. I think you have some questions for our speakers.
Yes, thank you, Salina, and thank you, Minister Costa, for that wonderful, wonderful insight, and for being such a wonderful host and supporter of the Youth for Climate series from the very beginning. Our next question is for Halla, which is from Hemant. Hemant asks, apart from helping established organizations make a move towards net zero emissions, how can we support new innovations and ideas?
That's a great question, thank you. And I just want to thank all of you for your valuable contributions here. And I'm so glad to hear Minister Costa raise the issue of who's in the conversation changes how we engage in these conversations. At the B team, we have something we call a change who to change how. And we absolutely believe that it's critical. And take a look at the COP in the UK now. I mostly see white men of middle age or above on the team that's tackling this crisis that's impacting women and the next generation. And so there's something broken in that. So I have high hopes for Italy. First, I just want to say that. I think committing to the race to zero is something we all need to commit to. And one of the most important asks I have for all of you, I don't know if this is directly an answer to the question, but is that we need to recognize the interdependence of people, planet, and our economies. And one of the biggest problems we have out there is we have an economic system that measures everything to the quarter instead of to the quarter century, which this challenge calls for, and what you should be calling for. So one of the biggest asks I think all of you can have out there is we actually need to come out of COVID with a reset in our economic system. We cannot anymore run this Milton Friedman short-termism and survive. None of us. This is gonna be the single most important systemic change to actually allow us to put people and our only shared home, the planet, and all of its life at the center of how we work. We need a new definition of success. It can no longer be just financial profit. It has to include, shared prosperity on a healthy planet. That has to be part of the definition. And we need to reject this whole shareholder primacy idea that's been at the heart of our economic system for 50 years now. It was put forward by one American male economist. It's time to put different people at the heart of reimagining, redesigning, and resetting our economy to work for all of humanity. And we can only do that by changing who's around the table. And this is not something that governments can do alone or private sector can do alone, the youth can do alone or civil society. We need to come together in what I like to refer to as reset dialogues, where we bridge divides and start finding our shared need to come together in this agenda. And in recognizing our interdependence, we can get there. But we all need to be part of the race to zero, and it needs to be 1.5 to stay alive.
Thank you so much. I know I'm like getting enthused over here. You've got like a whole round of applause and a standing ovation from my side. And I can see Luisa's reaction. And I want to take the time now to talk a little bit more about this reset and hear, Luisa, what do you think, how can young people help drive this forward? And what do you think that, youth activism and private sector engagement looks like? To make sure that we're really seeing a revolutionary change in how we see the country and our globe's progress in the economic system.
That's a wonderful question. I think it first of all has to do a lot with participation and interaction that is not fake. A lot what has been done prior to Fridays for Future was youth being invited to a table that was actually not a table, but a huge distraction from what was really going on. And including youth without meaning it doesn't make a difference. And including youth in dialogue while burning fossil fuels or burning their future doesn't mean anything. So I think for that, it has to do with honesty and realness about what this is about and how we want to approach it. And after that, I think all those doors are open. Yet I'm hugely careful when it comes to excitement about any form of engaging with youth when it isn't connected to real and meaningful and measurable climate action, because that is eventually what matters. And I kind of fear that future where in 2030 and 2040, we will have the nicest sustainability reports everywhere. We will have the greenest looking policies, the big bold headlines, and a youth table in every institution thinkable, and rising emissions. That is what I'm seeing right now, looking at what we are doing when it comes to kind of nice and show-off interaction with all kinds of players on the one side, and continued investment in fossil fuels, continued burning, continued exporting of fossil fuel infrastructure and finance. That is the ambivalence we are seeing right now. And to close that gap, a precondition, in my understanding, would have to be meaningful climate action when you're actually meaning to take care of the youth and wanting to make sure that they have a safe planet to live on today and tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Luisa. Our next question is for you, Maximo, from Julia. Julia says, your remarks about advocacy in Argentina made me think about a beautiful documentary by Argentinian film director Fernando Solanas, and it's called A Journey to the Fumigated Towns. And her question is, what role can the arts play in getting people to connect with climate issues?
Yeah, I would like to say that, unluckily for us, Pino Solanas leave us from this world a few days ago. So I would like to say a hi for the family, because he was a great environmental fighter, and one of the only politicians that started with all this in Argentina. Yeah, here in this part of the world, you know how this works. It's all about, it's all about agrotoxics. It's all about farming, cows, pigs, etc. All about transgenic, all about deforestation, all about forest fires. This year, we already burned in Argentina the size of almost 50 cities of Buenos Aires. And it's not all over the news. It's not like the Amazonia fire. And we burned the whole country this year during the quarantine. There's a lot of ways to involve. There's a lot of ways to start doing something. The thing is that this is like a mob here. A few people decide everything, and until we are not a big amount of people trying to do a change, politicians don't take that, and the politicians are the ones that are with the same business with the ones of the farm and etc. It's like a vicious circle that everyone knows this here. So including the youth in important roles for us, it's starting to be like the rainbow. What does this mean? For example, in the Congress, we have a generational change in the Congress now. We have a congressman and woman of 30 years old. I'm 30 years old. I just turned 30 years old. When I talk with someone of that age, I'm not saying that someone older doesn't care. I'm talking that they're like in the same page that I am, and they directly take what we are saying, and they try to pass a bill. It's like very easy, everything with that generational change. So we are trying to put a lot of young people in important roles everywhere, in the companies as young CEOs, etc., etc., etc. And some of them, I will not say all of them, see the world with another paradigm, not the normal economical capitalist paradigm. And that's a very important thing that you said before. Until we do not start doing the biggest question of all, that is, when we are going to talk about change the economy system, everything we are saying about climate change is not going to happen. We have to directly change a lot of stuff of the system. Some, as we said, we are changing it inside the system that we have right now, because we believe we are in a transition. But that transition has to take us to another thing completely different
And we have to think outside of the box, as Nisreen said. And we need to do it right now. And that is going to be the final big fight that we have to achieve one day. And we have to be we have to have a lot of courage to talk about this, especially in places like Latin America, where we go, we talk about this, and they kill us. It's not as easy as it sounds, everything we say. There's a big backstage here. In fact, I have friends that they do the same stuff that I do, and they have a death menace. People call them and say, if you you continue doing this, you are going to be dead. How can you work like that? You want a better world? And I have to say this, sorry, we are talking with people from the first world, If you do not help us, it's very difficult. It's very difficult because here in the third world, it's very easy to corrupt people. If you come with money, everything is very easy. If you come with a big company from the other part of the world, it's very easy. It's very, very easy to corrupt people here. So we really need your help. Sorry, I could talk a lot, so I will stop here. I will stop here. Or maybe say the phrase that we always say here. We always say that if you consider us a developing country, help us to develop in the right way directly. We want to be a developed country also, but a sustainable developed country, no a bad way developed country. So sorry, thank you very much.
This is the part I hate because we have to close the conversation. We're running over time already, but I really appreciate the dialogue that we've had. Nisreen, I want to give you the final word or sentence. Is there anything you'd like to leave the audience with, just keeping in mind that we've got to be brief to close up?
At the end, I just want to say that climate justice can take many shapes, and climate justice actually represents many issues. I think Máximo has just touched some of the issues regarding climate justice. So actually, climate change is somehow taking the right of development from many countries. For example, many African countries just discovered oil and fossil fuel in their countries, but they will not be able to use it due to the high emissions from the already developed countries. Now, mentioning that in the time of the colonialism, many of the countries were actually built because of the other countries' benefits. Third and last, some people also, because when we look at the global north and global south countries, we see that more developed countries are in the global north, which actually take us into some of the racism issues that we can talk about until tomorrow and even after that. So climate justice can take many shapes, and climate justice represents many issues in the current world. Well, very, very much needed to actually address is the time we are consuming in having discussions where currently many countries, for example, Libya, currently having floods in their countries. And when we say that SDGs is about leaving no one behind, it's actually not an accurate sentence, because many countries and many people were already left behind. I think the accurate sentence should be taking the people or the countries and nations who were left behind to actually reach a point where we are equal in rights, in obligations, in development, in human situation, and even in our emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think it's resonating with all of us. This just transition is absolutely crucial and at the center of what we're talking about when we say raising ambition. What is that ambition? Thank you so much, everyone, for your insightful contributions to today's conversation, and for everyone in the audience. We really appreciate you being here today.
We are wrapping up this session, unfortunately, but the dialogue always continues. For those of you who had additional questions for our speakers today, feel free to ask them on Instagram or Twitter, or send any reflections our way. Check out the chat to see who to tag.
And be sure to join us in December for episode 7, where we'll focus on driving innovation and entrepreneurship, the next level on this conversation today.
And we want to share a big thank you to the Italian Ministry for Environment, Land and Sea, the World Bank Group's Connect for Climate program, and the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth for hosting us today. And please do follow them on social media to stay updated about all upcoming Youth for Climate live episodes.
Now, please, everyone, turn on your video so that we can say goodbye. And we'll see you next month for episode 7. Thank you so much. Let's keep driving forward that ambition. Bye.
See you next month. Bye.